Hey everybody, and welcome to another one of my painting tips and tricks videos. Today we're going to do part 2 of the grid method. I'm going to be doing a series on using the grid method for your paintings and what we've been doing. The first video I showed you how to grid out your canvas with a 1 inch by 1 inch square grid and how to create your photo in Photoshop with a grid on it as well. There are some other tools that you can use for the grid method, and we'll talk about those in a future video. For now, what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to actually draw using the grid method. I've got my reference photo here that we did in the first video. It's up on my computer and it's already gridded out, and I'm just going to have you zoom in and I'm going to talk about some of the key ideas. You still have to draw when you do the grid method. It doesn't just automatically appear on there. This is just a good guide for you to kind of get better at drawing, and also if you want to quickly get your image on the canvas, the grid method is great, especially if you can already draw really well. So I'm going to have you zoom in and we're going to talk about how to transfer that image onto the canvas here. Alright, so when doing the grid method with a figure or portrait, one of the things you want to do is try to find the part that's probably the hardest or most important and start there. So I would say for this image, I would start with the nose and then continue down the face, and then the rest of the body and everything is going to be a lot easier. So capturing in a portrait, and we've got an easy portrait here, we don't have eyes or ears to draw, we just have some nose and lips and chin. So we'll do a more advanced one as we go through this series. But for a portrait, you want to capture those facial features really well. So if we look at the grid here, and I'm sorry for my gross studio computer here, but we want to go on the grid here and then count down to where the nose is. So if we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares over, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares down, that's where the point of the nose is. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll just mark it like that. That's where our nose is going to be. Alright, so what we want to do when we're using the grid method is look at what's in the square, and we can see obviously it's the point of the nose, and you still have to actually draw the nose. You can't just just say, oh, I'm going to just do some scribbles in there and it's going to work because I'm in that square. Something you have to look at is where does the nose cross over on this first line. And you can see here it crosses about halfway, and it's got an angle going out towards the left here. So it's not a straight line down, but it's an angular line coming through right in that center spot there. And then when it comes down, it curves a little bit, curves under, and then comes up. And then it crosses over about a third of the way up this line. So those are all little things you have to think about when you're drawing with the grid method. So if I go here about halfway and start bringing this down, what I want to do is look at the negative space and I want to try to mimic that negative space. So again, this comes down about here to that 1/3 of the canvas. Then we're going to continue. So if you follow the lips down, they cross over right about here, less than a third. And then the lip portion is probably the hardest portion. I'm going to go back up here. And you don't have to draw perfect lines either. You can kind of shimmy your way through this. Keep building out. And that's the great thing about the grid method, is you're just really taking your time . And I'll show you later on how to touch up these lines with paint. Alright, so we're looking now at the lips, and if we're looking at where the chin comes down, it's about right here. So we know we're going to have to connect all the way down to this point. And the chin is a curved, so I'm going to actually do the chin a little bit first. So you can see this little pie piece right here that's created by the grid. I want to look at my reference photo and make sure that's pretty accurate. And now I'm looking at some of the negative space here. So negative space is basically the shape that's left. It's the outside of the positive space. So if you were to think of like you're doing a puzzle, and this little puzzle piece right here that fits into the mouth, that's kind of what you're thinking about drawing, rather than the actual lips and everything. You're looking at what that puzzle piece would look like. So again, the grid method might be a nice way to get your image onto the canvas, but you still actually have to draw everything. So right now I'm focused on the outside shapes. Eventually, once I've got the whole outside shape put in, I will put the inside shapes in, so inside of the lips and all of that. So now I've got the hardest part in, and the part that's probably going to be the most important when it comes to the actual painting looking like a portrait. So the rest of everything else you can kind of go through a little bit faster. So again, we're coming up here with the chin, and we're going to look as we come down. The neck crosses just right in front of this corner. So all of those little things you're thinking of. The neck crosses right in front of that corner, comes back down. It crosses just above this corner, so we'll create that little curve there. Then it cuts through and goes just below this corner. Comes down. And also things you can do, it comes right through here. Things you can do is start kind of lining up, making sure that you're in the right square. The chin lines up with this corner right here, things like that. So we're just going through. This goes just above, kind of drops down right to here, and then this kind of follows this line almost all the way down. All right, so then we'll go back up now. The hair creates this little triangle right here, and it comes up and crosses right in front, travels up this line a little bit, then pops out in front. This line comes up to about here, and then if you want to, you can cross-reference, make sure 1, 2, 3, 4 squares down, that's right. Pop this back up through here. It comes up just above just below this corner, pops right there, and then a little piece creates this little triangle. Comes up here, crosses up at the top, just barely breaches this line, and then comes back down, and then there's a little triangle right here, so we'll line that up. So you can see how you're always kind of referencing these little spots. So I'm going to keep taking you through. It crosses right through the corners of these next two. That's nice and easy. Then we've got kind of some wispy hair coming out here that crosses right to this corner. But then we have another line that's in a little bit. And then the ponytail, or the hair I should say, in the back kind of travels along down this line, and it's not one of those things that's super defined, so it's not super important to get it perfect. What we do want to do is just make sure we're bringing it down the right distance. Okay, and what's really cool is that this line comes down to about here and then connects up to this line and then is relatively straight down the line. Again, something you can kind of play around with later. So now we have the overall outline shape. What I want to do now is I'm going to continue with the hair. We've got it coming right through here, and then it comes down to about this corner. It curls under. Kind of goes into shadow. It's pretty dark to see on that reference photo. I'm going to go down to this part just so I can see a little better. Alright, the shirt comes right through here, comes down, crosses right into this corner right here, then goes right to this next corner, which is nice. It actually almost follows the corners all the way down about here. So alright, so this hair, and I have to look really closely here, it kind of curls right in through here, and then comes down like so. So I'm not going to really worry about that too much until I get to the painting portion. If we fix up the shirt here, the neck comes down to about here, and then got a little piece there, and it connects up. Okay, with the hair itself, there's a little opening. The nose, I want to continue up. Like so, just because you can kind of see through it, the hair. The lip will starts right up through here and comes down and kind of just connects up to this piece. Okay, that's really not super important because we'll be playing around with those types of things when we are actually painting. But it's okay to have some of that stuff in there for now. Alright, so I have my outline now. What I'm going to do is just add in a few details here. You can continue using the grid method. You kind of get the gist of it. What we're going to do now is solidify these lines with some paint, and then we'll tone the canvas, and that will be it for part 2. All right, so next what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some burnt sienna. I like using burnt sienna when I tone my canvas for portraits, just because the orangish color kind of fits well with skin tones later on. So I'm taking a liner brush, a script liner, a very tiny little brush. You can really use any brush that you're comfortable with for this. But what we want to do is just come in here now, and we want to solidify our line. So when we do this portion, we want to make sure that we're a little more accurate. So just kind of taking your time. And blocking in and making the lines nice and solid. Anything you don't want to keep, or if you find there's something that you kind of messed up earlier, just don't paint over it. You can fix it later in the painting. What we're trying to do is get an accurate outline that we can work from, so we have accurate proportions. You can always make adjustments in the painting. That's why the grid method is only a tool. It's not the end-all be-all to your painting. It's getting the image on here, and what happens is you start to form some hand-eye coordination. You start to see relationships where things line up. Because a lot of times when we view something, we're actually not viewing it in the way we think we are. A lot of times things look a lot different when we start drawing them. And by using the grid method, you can start to see where things line up and the relationships between like the eyes and the ears and the nose. Obviously this particular image is a little bit more easy in the sense that it's a profile and there's not the eyes and the more difficult elements, but I wanted to start out easier anyway. But that way you can kind of start to see relationships, how you start to look at the grid, and then eventually we'll go more complicated. And so what happens, I hope, is you start to develop some drawing skills by using the grid method. You start to, like I said, see those relationships, see proportions and how they relate to different areas on the face. And then eventually, you probably won't even need the grid. Although I like the grid for the speed of putting the image onto the canvas and the accuracy. If you're doing a commission for someone, and you're under a time crunch, rather than just tracing it, which I think is probably fine too, but because you still have to paint the image, but at least you get a little more of a flow with the grid method. You don't have to sit there and fuss over every little line. You can kind of start suggesting things a little bit, and that will give it more of a painterly feel, but tracing kind of is a little bit more stale. But both work well with if you're doing something and you're under a time crunch and you just really need to get it onto the canvas and just focus on the painting, because the painting itself is what's most important. So you can see here I've got my image on here now. And if you want, you can go and kind of add in maybe some of the shadows and things like that in here on the body. That's up to you. If you do that, you want to find a spot to start with. Let's say we come down 1, 2, 3 squares here. We have a little wrinkle here, and then in the corner, it starts to come down. like so. You can start putting in other shadows if you'd like to. Once you do that, I'd probably do that a little bit later. But once you have your lines on here, we're going to tone the canvas. That will help get rid of some of the grid and some of the graphite that's on here. And then you're ready to start the painting. All right, so the final step, taking a large brush, taking our burnt sienna, really thinning it out, and just basically, again, this has to be dry up here, doing a thin coat of, and I'm working with acrylic. You can do this with oil too. It's just a little bit more of a process. We'll talk about that in another video. But if you're doing oil, I would suggest starting out with acrylic just because it's faster, or using something that's going to dry your original sketch on here. Dry a lot faster, so you don't have to wait a long time before you tone the canvas. Or at the very worst, you could just not tone the canvas with oil and just go with the lines that you put in. But again, it's just a thin layer. Helps get rid of the stark white canvas. And it gets rid of a little bit of that graphite at the same time. You can still see it, which is nice because we'll add in a few shadows and things in the next step. But brush strokes don't have to be perfect. You just want to get the entire canvas covered. And now you have a nice basic sketch. It's subtle, it's faint, which is great because now you can just focus on the painting itself. All right, so that's how you use the grid method and how you can kind of get your first little tonal sketch onto the canvas. From here, you can actually start doing the painting. You just want to make sure you let all of that dry. If you have any questions, you can message me at tim@timgagne.com or post them in the comments, and I'd be happy to answer all of your questions. Make sure you check out my website, timgagne.com, for online painting lessons. You can watch a ton of full-length painting lessons in acrylic and oil. Lots of subject matter, but I'll be continuing to do some videos on the grid method because I think it's a great way for people to start drawing a little bit and also getting more accurate with some of their proportions in their paintings, because the trick now is you have to paint it. You can't just magically paint every little square because the grid will actually end up going away. So once your sketch is on the canvas, now it's just time to have some fun, relax, and do the painting. Thanks for watching, everyone. I'll see you again soon.